you see robust changes quickly. On the parameters that reflect resilience, that rapidity with which you come back down to baseline, 7 hours of mindfulness practice will not touch that particular process. It's going to take much more. So it's very interesting. We're beginning to learn more of the granular details about what dose, if you will, of practice may actually produce certain kinds of changes versus others.
So it's not an insubstantial commitment. Golbie, how do you address that when you're trying to sell these programs? I mean, you can't just say, like, it's all right, I got it 5 minutes a day for 2 weeks and you're all set. You're having to sell people on a much more robust curriculum if it sounds like it's going to be remotely effective. Is there the receptivity to that? Are people saying, okay, we're willing to put in the work?
I think some are and some aren't. I mean, we talked about physical exercise. The longevity of the practice, I feel like, comes to, or how people approach it usually comes down to 3 things. If they have the knowledge about the benefits, what to do, and that might be enough to inspire action, right? So they have knowledge and they think, okay, I'm going to take some action. Some people stop at the knowledge. They know what's good for them. They know they should go to the gym. They know the benefits of meditation or mindfulness, but they won't do it. Those other people follow through and take the action. But all of us have taken action and then realized something's hard, and so we give up after a while. It's the people that have the discipline, they have the knowledge, they're willing to take the action, and they have the discipline to carry forward, are the ones that are really going to reap the benefits. Now, there are a lot of reasons why some people might not be willing to make repeated, sustained action or have the discipline for this practice. And I'm not yet in that conversation with individuals. I mean, what I did at BlackRock more than anything, I feel like, was start a conversation more generally around the knowledge and open the door for action. But I didn't necessarily, and my discipline kept me there twice a week. The program ended up growing into twice a week. But there was no obligation because I felt like it was such a tenuous thing and it was such a gentle, fragile invitation in this particular environment that to make it, to set conditions around which it would be of any value, you have to do it every day for a certain amount of time for the rest of your life, would turn people away. When I thought the actual real benefit is getting all of us in a broader conversation, even if there's debate, and even if this is a long game, and it takes 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. We're planting the seeds now, and it's each person's individual journey to decide if they want to come to the practice for a sustained period of time.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Richie, you've not only been an advocate, but I really appreciate that you are not afraid of addressing some of the challenges that we are facing as a community and that you as a researcher are facing. You just published a really quite invaluable article that listed some of the challenges that the scientific community in particular, researchers just like yourselves, are facing in getting the study of mindfulness and meditation accepted. How do you do effective double-blind trials? How do you standardize the dosage? Can you talk about some of those challenges that you and your colleagues are facing and how, if at all, you are looking to overcome them?
Well, I appreciate you raising those questions, David. Research in this area is really daunting because it is just not easy. If you are studying a pharmaceutical, you can give a person the pharmaceutical that you're testing and give another group a placebo, and you can contrast the response to those two interventions. You cannot do that when you're evaluating the impact of meditation. And so it poses all kinds of methodological challenges. In addition, you alluded to the issue of, quote, dosing. If a person is going to practice, say, for 20 minutes a day, Bill was talking about practicing for 2 20-minute sessions a day, we don't know from a scientific perspective if it's better to practice in one single 20-minute period, 2 10-minute periods, or even 10 2-minute periods that are sprinkled throughout the day. Moreover, it may be that it's best for certain kinds of people to practice in one way and for other kinds of people to practice in another way. We have no friggin' idea from the scientific perspective there's not been a single study, not one, that has evaluated those kind of questions. There is so much that we have to do from a scientific perspective to really start to unpack this. And with regard to the issue of comparison groups, that's a huge challenge. Many of you, I'm sure, in this audience know that in groups like mindfulness-based stress reduction or in other contexts where meditation is taught, there's a lot of other elements in the intervention besides the specifics of the practice. And there is some reason to believe that those other elements are important. There may even be reason to believe that some of those other elements are more important than the actual techniques themselves. And in the traditional contemplative practice, those other elements are often part of what we refer to as the view. And simply invoking that view, invoking those intentions, may be as important, if not more important, than the mechanics of the practice. And so there again has not been a single scientific study, to the best that I'm aware, that has looked at the invocation of the view itself and the impact that that has on changes in the brain. But there's every reason to expect that we would have those kinds of effects. And so there's just, for those of you who are budding scientists, there's a lot to keep you going for a long time.
This makes me wonder, Golbie, how do you actually sell these programs? I suspect you're not using the term "the view," but are you essentially trying to change people's perspectives and outlooks and worldview and trying to change the way they understand and respond to stressors and suffering? Or is it more a matter of giving them very practical tools that they can use to manage their stress when they're working at BlackRock?
So when you say sell the programs, you mean to people at BlackRock?
No, to the individuals themselves. I mean,
Oh.
when you're in there
Yeah.
working with employees, is their expectation that they are essentially, going to get that minimum effective dose that they need to ratchet down their stress levels? Or is there the understanding that this is perhaps the first steps on a much longer journey, one that could change the worldview, their own worldviews, and introduce something, again, maybe not called the view, but is it the receptivity to change the way that they're thinking, to change the way that they're reacting to suffering and stress?
There's absolutely receptivity. So at the end of 2+ years, the program was 1,500 people, is 1,500 people around the world in 17 different countries. And the way most of them got there through word of mouth, so through a colleague or maybe the team leader said, hey, you should come along. They would be invited to join and pop into 2 meditations that I would lead twice a week, every week. And they would get an email from me every week that had something about my own personal experience, something that I was learning, research. I would share Richie's research. I'd share other people's research, articles, some of David's articles, various books, really to give them the tools to begin what was their own program and to expose them to a broader conversation and a lot of different resources. Most people, nearly everyone, save maybe like 5, came out of their own requesting to join. It was an opt-in program. There are a few people I snuck on the distribution list because I thought, this is going to be good. I want them to be part of the conversation. But there was no real resistance from individuals, save for a few very senior people. And I know this is a leadership conference, so it might be worth talking a little bit about that aspect of it, which is some people have a lot of resistance to things that they can't, that are out of their comfort zone. And if we think about our leaders, they are sometimes in very difficult positions. They have a lot of responsibility, and we tend to be very hard on them, and they don't always get the compassion they actually deserve. And if you think about how leaders get to the spot where they are, it's usually by having a certain way of thinking and speaking and behaving and reacting that's actually been really supported and rewarded. And so they get really identified and refined to certain sets of behaviors. And so with a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility and a lot of judgment, they actually don't have a lot of room for error in order to take on new practices, especially practices that are very different from what they may have been previously rewarded in. So if I did find resistance, it was from people who were very well established in a certain way of being, and that has worked for them very well, and so they are in certain leadership positions. Now, using research, talking about the data, talking about the science, which would resonate with their intellectual mind, that opened the door. For others, it was simply just a human connection and relating to the part of them that was, that maybe was beyond their role and beyond their ego or their intellect. So resistance did come up. Often it came from the few leaders that I would try and talk to, but it came for what I thought were really understandable and you know, reasonable reasons. And so there was always a way around it, though. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And the 1,500 people at BlackRock, it's worth acknowledging the good work you've done. Richie, I sense that you have to do something of a high wire act as both a advocate and also as someone who, with very clear eyes, understands the challenges and the limitations of even the work that you and your colleagues have produced so far. And I wonder if you sense that perhaps the momentum is even going too fast. Adam Grant recently in the New York Times wrote a well-publicized, well-circulated op-ed, "Can we end the meditation madness?" And in it, he quoted you as saying there are still very few methodologically rigorous studies that demonstrate the efficacy of mindfulness-based interventions. If that is the case, how can you, with good conscience, keep recommending that we study these interventions, that people like Penny put real money behind some of these programs, and that people essentially, what, are we taking your word for it, that when I could be binging on a Netflix series, I'm going to spend 7 hours learning mindfulness?
Wonderful questions, David. Thank you for asking. I think your intuition is quite right. I do feel very much like I am doing this high wire balancing act a lot of the time. We try as best we can to cultivate an attitude of just radical honesty in our own center. And we have, as part of our center, critics as well as those who are more in the camp of believers and who give me a hard time every day. I want that. Bring it on. It's really important in order to keep this work honest. So here's what I can say, and I can say this just with total confidence, and that is our brains are constantly being shaped all the time, wittingly or unwittingly. Most of the time our brains are being shaped unwittingly. Most of the time, our minds and brains are being just pushed around by the forces around us. The metaphor I think that's appropriate is a sailboat which lost its rudder in the middle of a turbulent ocean, just being pushed from one extreme to another. And I think that is an apt metaphor for the state of our minds and brains most of the time. And I think the invitation is that we actually can take more responsibility for shaping our own minds and brains. I believe that the research really supports that general statement totally. And I feel absolutely confident in defending that to my toughest critics. So I think there's a lot of questions about the details and about whether this, 8 weeks of doing this is the right way to do it, or is this more effective? And there's going to be a huge number of those kind of questions to resolve. But I have total conviction that there's a recent study which was published that received quite a bit of attention a number of years ago where they used smartphones to assess people in the real world. And they asked them basically 3 questions. One is, from a list of items, choose the activity in which you're currently engaged. The second question is, where is your mind right now? Is it focused on what you're doing, or is it focused elsewhere? And the third question is, right now, are you happy or unhappy, and how much? So the results of that study, which was done on several thousand Americans, is that 47% of our waking life, the average American spends not paying attention to what she or he is doing, 47% of the time. And I have a very strong conviction that we could do better.
And you earlier invoked the name of that study, which was the conclusion: a wandering mind is an unhappy mind.
Yes, and that was one of the conclusions of that study, that when our minds wander, we are not happy. And I think that the evidence that we can change that is incontrovertible. Yeah. But whether it cures diabetes or depression or lowers your blood pressure, we don't know. And you know, the truth is that these practices did not evolve in the context of treating illnesses. They evolved to produce awakening. And there is a difference.
I want to return to this issue very, very soon, but I had a question I needed to ask Golbie. You're right to mention, we're here at the Mindful Leadership Summit. A lot of the work that many in this room are doing is actually geared towards leaders. But of course, leaders are a small subset of those who work in organizations. There are mid-level managers, there's lowly reporters, there are people on the factory floor. What is it that leaders in particular are looking for when they engage with mindfulness practices? And how does that differ from an IT person, an hourly worker, a wage worker, someone in a dry cleaning? And then how do you create a program, just to pile on here,
Right. Bring it on.
that's suitable for all those different audiences?
Okay. So, I think the thing we need to remember, we talk about leaders, and that's an important role that some people play at work or in their families or in their communities. I think we need to remember that we're all larger and broader than the roles that we play, and that everybody is in reality a leader. Now, that might sound kind of corny, and everyone hears that, but the reality is true. Some people might not have organizational or hierarchical responsibility over others, or managerial responsibility, but a true leader doesn't actually need that to influence change. And so anyone can be and is a leader. Now, I mentioned earlier, leaders in organizations do have different considerations. They are privy to different information, they have different responsibilities. Sometimes the margin of error for making mistakes in a very public way is smaller. And so addressing that and working with those individuals you need to consider the pressures that he or she is under as a leader in an organization. But any one of us can influence change. And as organizational leaders, part of our responsibility is to create the conditions in our organizations that allow people, in my belief system, to show up authentically. Because from that place of authenticity, from that place of inspiration, anyone is really a leader. And we do that both by influencing change and getting things done if we have the power to do that, but also embodying that. And that's where your own practice comes in. That's when it is, be the change you wish to see in the world. That's where it is, show up as the leader that you want to be, and you will influence the people around you and how you speak and how you act. And so, yes, we should deal with leaders differently. They have different roles that they play at the office, but ultimately, we're all human. You can relate to anyone just as a person. I know some of the most influential and powerful people quite literally in the world, and so do you. And I talk to them like they're my friends. They're just people. Because many of them don't actually want to be seen as that role. That's exhausting. We all play roles all day long, and we all know that that can be really tiring, because most of us just want to be able to be ourselves. And most people in a work context that I've encountered want to feel like they can be themselves, and they're looking for meaning. And so to relate to them on that level really opens a door in terms of what's possible in the conversation.
Let me see if I can thread a needle here. I haven't entirely formulated the question, but Richie mentioned awakening, and you're talking about being authentic at work. And it strikes me that here we have something that looms over a lot of these discussions, which is, Richie, as you perhaps just alluded to, some of these practices were not just made up in the last 30 years. I don't mean to hide the ball here. These are historic, oftentimes Buddhist meditation techniques. Richie, you're not shy about your own personal relationship with Tibetan Buddhism in particular, your relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and yet here we are in a very secular audience. how do you thread that needle? And as these practices become more mainstream, as they show up in places like BlackRock, is it frankly still useful to be so affiliated with historical Buddhist traditions, even if that is where some of these practices did in fact originate?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that I really reflect on a lot and ask for feedback a lot. And I struggle with these questions. I certainly, undeniably, the Buddhist tradition is at the core and is where many of the practices that we study come from. I do believe, in the same way that His Holiness talks about secular ethics, that it is possible to bring these practices out in the world in a completely secular way, which should be acceptable to individuals from any religious or spiritual tradition, or individuals who are complete non-believers, as His Holiness often talks about. And I also believe that it's possible to convey the so-called view in a way which is secular. And the elements of the view really are about, I think, universal ethical principles that we can embed this work in. So, when we put our butt on the cushion, we invoke the intention that we're not primarily doing this for ourselves, but we are doing it really for the benefit of others. And that engaging in these practices can be a radical act of generosity. And I think that there are ways to frame this, I think, in the context of secular values, which are authentic and are consistent with the tradition from which they emerged, but don't carry the religious baggage that they might otherwise in the original context. And so, I think that it's important for us to continuously be on guard about those issues. And we're doing work in the public schools now, and so it's super important that we do this in a way which is quite clean in that sense and secular. But I think it's possible, and I think it's possible to do it and still, for me personally, not to hide my relationship with His Holiness or other Buddhist teachers who have been inspirational to me and have been an important guiding force in the kind of work that we do.
Golbie, how do you deal with that as you're bringing these practices to a more mainstream audience? Does the first mention of Buddhism or the Dalai Lama send people walking out the door?
No, the first mention doesn't send them walking out the door.
So it's the second mention.
I'm very particular and deliberate about the language I use and when I use it and how I use it. I think the thing that I find most intriguing is this element of communication and how you frame something that might otherwise be very uncomfortable for people, or just because it's different, potentially. How do you frame it in a way that they hear it, and they resonate with it, and they relate to it? Look, in certain environments, like financial services, like the one I came from, there is a very secular approach to this, and I'm very deliberate about what I leave out. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right answer, actually. I'm kind of trying to make sense of it myself, but I know that if the impact I want to have is to have a broader conversation around meditation, mindfulness, or even mind training, that's actually what needs to happen in order to engage people, and then to slowly expose people to different elements of it, again, for their taking or not.
Earlier in the morning, we were asked to look for those questions that I think we should carry through the weekend, and it sounds like we may have found another one. What's the appropriate language that we need to use when talking about these practices to an ever larger audience? And we're not going to come up with the exact right answers here, but maybe we can have a breakout session later. I'd love to turn to questions. We have about 10 minutes. Is the hashtag mindful leader? That's the hashtag. You can still get your questions in. And we have someone from the organization actually bringing questions off the web. So I think you have a live mic. Let's get our first one.
Okay, from Carrie on Twitter. What kind of mental exercises do you two think are useful beyond meditating, and how do you suggest beginning these exercises?
Golbie, let's start with you. I mean, are you just teaching meditation when you go into companies, or is meditation and mindfulness part of a broader suite of resiliency, of mental well-being exercises that you're offering?
I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the main conversation thread that brought us all here today is around meditation mindfulness. I think the larger conversation that we need to have is really around well-being, which David said a few times. Mind training might be the thing that opens the door in organizations that are all about the mind and the intellect and ideas. But we have to think more broader about our physical well-being, integrating that, our emotional well-being, our relationships. So when I talk about meditation, I actually do it in a much more holistic sense. I talk about well-being in general. And I talk about other aspects that are related to business, like decision-making. Like I talk about conversation, I talk about managing emotions. There are various components of how you show up at work in order to perform well, in order to be authentic. I have a real thing for authenticity and integrity that spread beyond meditation and mind training.
So what specific other practices was the question?
So what we might do is, so practices in terms of what we would spend time in, it'd be half an hour and it would be a meditation practice. Usually they were a concentration-based practice where we would be focusing on the breath and learning. And again, this is, for example, the language that I would use in a corporate audience. I'd say, well, we're going to build 3 muscles here. We're going to build, because corporations and they all want to build skills, you know. We're going to build 3 muscles. We're going to build the muscle of noticing when our minds wandered, the muscle of letting go of what it's wandered to, which can be very challenging, especially if the storyline is emotionally evocative or seductive and we want to stay with it. And the third muscle is coming back. So in those 2 sessions, it was very much around mental muscles. The broader conversation was also, though, about these other aspects of well-being, about noticing the food that you're taking in, noticing and just making a note of how much you're sleeping, noticing your emotional state throughout the day and ranking that, and starting to bring more awareness to how you're existing and how you're being in the world. So those were other examples of practices, but in terms of what we really focused on, we didn't spend the time, the energy, or the money on that yet.
Okay, well, lots of work to be done. Another question, please.
George from Twitter asks, who is an example of one of the most mindful leaders in the world today, and what can we learn from their style?
Richie. That wasn't the answer. I was directing the question to him.
But it may have been the answer too.
No, I would say His Holiness the Dalai Lama for me is a great example, and it also helps to really broaden what we mean by mindfulness. I attended an event in honor of his birthday in July in New York City and came back and someone asked me about the event and I said, you know, my concept of mindfulness was broadened by being at this event because when His Holiness addresses every person that he encounters, whether it's a custodian, a security person, or Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein who are at this event, doesn't matter who it is. He sees in each person, he recognizes the seeds of compassion, of kindness, and he touches that place in each of those people. He remembers. And in that sense, mindfulness is so much more than what we think of in the sort of standard way in which it's been defined in the West. And being able to regard each person all the time, 24/7 in that way is really what this kind of caring mindfulness is about. And so for me, he is just such a powerful exemplar of mindful leadership.
Anyone who's not a reincarnate Tibetan Lama come to mind?
You know, I've had the great fortune of hanging out a lot with reincarnated Tibetan lamas who, but I'm sure there are. And so, you know, I don't know them as well as I do the reincarnated Tibetan lamas.
Strange circles you run in, my friend. Another question from Twitter, please.
Stephanie Z asks, do you recommend meditation as a group versus an individual? And which has greater benefits on people and for an organization?
Briefly, I want to hear from each of you. Richie, is there studies? Are there studies? Do we know? Is there a scientific answer to this? And the Golbie, what have you found more effective?
I would say no, there are no studies that have directly addressed this question, and I think the most important response is that one size is likely not to fit all. So what's best for certain people is not going to be best for other people.
What seems to work?
In organizations, again, one size doesn't fit all. Some people like the group environment, especially if it's new for them. It tends to normalize the practice to see other people there. Groups can be very powerful learning mechanisms because people can talk about their experience and they feel like they're in it together. That said, the individual practice, in my own experience, has been the most powerful. Hasn't always been the easiest or most pleasant at times. I find comfort in being in groups, but in terms of the impact for me individually, sitting by myself and having to work through that has actually been the most impactful in the long run.
And I'll say, in the research I did for my book, Mindful Work, certainly the group applications where there was a consensus among a group of employees and some momentum there seemed to have at least a greater chance, if not of producing real outcomes, at least of creating a community that would endure. I think we probably have time for one more question from Twitter.
This question is for Golbie. How has mindfulness at Black improved interpersonal relationships?
Interpersonal relationships. And I want to let's hear about it from BlackRock, and also Richie in conclusion, and I'll give you the final word after we hear from Golbie. How has it changed your work at the Center for Investigative Healthy Minds? Because you are a leader in the field, but you're also a leader of that organization. So first, Golbie, interpersonal relationships at BlackRock.
So there's one quote that I think captures it, and if it's helpful, I can give some other data around this. Let me get this one. Maybe you should go while I'm looking for the quote. Oh, here I found it. All right. It says, so this is the feedback from people. It says, quote, "It makes me more open and receptive to colleagues. I also come out of the meditation session in a much better mood, which probably makes me easier to deal with from my colleagues' perspective." So over the course of 2+ years, I got over 700 responses and anecdotes and stories of people sharing their lives from all different cities, all different countries, all different functions and roles at the firm. It's people related to this in a very human way. And in the various surveys, sometimes the experience, the impact was articulated like this. 84% were better at managing relationships at work. That's the one specifically about relationships. A few other points, and then I'll hand it to Richie. 91% were better at managing themselves at work. So that was time, energy, stress, just more generally. 90% had reduced stress. 85% had increased focus, mental resilience, and decision making. There's more, I don't want to take too much time, but essentially people saw they had more compassion for the other because we were relating to each other in a way that was beyond our roles and our hierarchical connections. And it was more, I see the human in you, and I get that life is hard, and we're all under a lot of stress, and let me help you more and connect with you more.
Richie, how has the practice changed the work that you do at University of Wisconsin?
Well, I would say it's changed it quite a bit. We work with embodying the practice, walking the talk all the time, and we have really collectively, I think, spent a lot of energy in our center creating an environment that is a reflection of the values that we value and that we seek to study. And so, it ranges from encouragement to engage in behavior which we think will cultivate well-being in ourselves and in others, practicing gratitude a lot. And being in a very competitive academic culture is a really interesting challenge, and it's really a kind of wonderful fire in which to cultivate certain qualities. For example, sympathetic joy, being able to rejoice in the accomplishments of others. That is not an easy thing to do in the academy. And it just provides such delicious fodder for really bringing awareness to all of this. And so we try to work with that in a very conscious way. I also just, I'm just extraordinarily grateful to the amazing people that we seem to have collected and attracted who collectively embody this. It's not just me, it's the entire organization.
Well, thank you. I'm experiencing lots of sympathetic joy, mudita, for your accomplishments, for Golbie's accomplishments, and a lot of gratitude for the Mindful Leadership Summit, for the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds, and for all the sponsors who helped make today and this webcast possible. And with that, we say goodbye to our audience online, and I release you all to lunch. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a reminder that lunch is between 12:15 and 1:45, and